Hi, this is my review of The Vampire of Havena. This is a solitaire adventure for the Dark Eye role-playing game 5th edition. This review is going to be completely spoiler-free. It's not going to have images, and I'm not going to reveal any encounters and moments within the adventure that will present an obstacle for you to enjoy this as a solo experience. Now, this adventure has to do with your character going through this difficult situation with many things pointing to the presence of a vampire in Havena. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. When you purchase the Vampire of Havena, you have two files. You have a normal version and a clickable version, and that's great because the clickable version is going to make navigating the entire PDF quite easy, because it has many hyperlinks so that you can click on the different encounters and choices throughout the adventure so that it takes you to that particular section. And so that's great overall. You also have some little circles that you can put your mark on them to keep track of certain things through the ordeal. And the document is fully bookmarked. You have these awesome looking illustrations, and everything is well written. However, I do have some criticisms. I did find some typos. They aren't a big deal, but they are there. And sometimes the black font of the letters, sometimes they overlap with a few of the darker images. So if you don't have good eyesight, you may actually end up skipping those sections by mistake. So keep that in mind if you're seeing like the picture of something of dark area. Try to look closely in case there are some letters there. I only found it once, but maybe there are other instances. I've played this a few times, but as I was telling you, you have to keep your eyes open for more similar situations. And even though you have a lot of hyperlinks, there is a small section within the table of contents where you can go to different parts of the book to understand the rules, because this is a self-contained adventure. You do not need the core rulebook to play this, or even the quick start. Here you're going to find all of the rules to play the adventure. So you have this section where it tells you if you want to know more about attribute checks, go to this particular encounter. But sadly, this little section doesn't have hyperlinks, so that would have been better. And I also found the combat rules, somewhat clumsy in their positioning, because they are not that obvious. Because, for example, when I first had my first combat encounter, I couldn't find the combat rules. And I looked at the section, looking for the number or the key to take me to those combat rules, and I simply could not get to them. But it turns out that they're in a different part just after the key encounter. So that was poorly designed, in my opinion. And maybe if they indicated in that certain encounter, for the combat rules, go to the next page or something like that, it would have been easier. It also doesn't help that in that encounter, the paragraph talks as if that encounter ends in that page. Because, for example, it says something like that. After a combat round, go to this page, but it should have said something like, to see if you want more information about the combat rules, go to this page or section. But despite that, the quality, the graphic layout and such is good, and I like the way the document looks overall, despite those criticisms. Now let's talk about the content of this adventure. Well, as I was telling you, I'm not going to spoil anything, and let's get into some technical things first. You have an appendix detailing Havena, harbor city of many traditions, and this is quite useful if, for example, you're not planning to purchase yet the Aventuria Gazetteer. If I'm not mistaken, it's coming out soon this year. And maybe this month, I'm not too sure about that. But as I was telling you, if you haven't purchased that Gazetteer, here you have information on Havena, harbor city of many traditions, with the information on the region, inhabitants, the governance, temples, trade and commerce, etc. It's a somewhat moody city, in my opinion. It has gone to through some catastrophes. They blame magic on those catastrophes. Specifically, a part of the city has been flooded almost completely. So there is a section in this area that feels like it has like a sunken city feel to it, with ruins and gloomy structures and such. So that's pretty cool. And there is this taboo on magic in the city, so you have all of the information to play in this city, to use it as an adventure hub when you play with your group. And the other thing that the appendix contains is information on how to role play as a rogue in this adventure, because this adventure is pretty much tailored for you to play it with a rogue or thief type of character. So you have information on living in the shadows and types of paths to adventure that you can have as a rogue, your skills, etc. And they invite you to create your own character. You have a pre-generated character with this adventure, but they do tell you that you could create your character using the core rules. But I would recommend against it, because this adventure feels almost completely tailored for a thief type of character. And we will get more into that at the conclusion of this adventure, of this review. So, as I was telling you, you have a pre-generated character who is more on the sneaky side of things. Don't expect to be too effective at combat. So they relies a bit more on stealth and guile and such. So that's really useful for the starting player. And you also have a map of Havena if you want to use it in your campaigns. And you have some floor plans for the adventure as well that are going to be useful when going through different encounters and such, of course. Now let's talk about this adventure. The adventure throws you into the middle of the action. I like that quite a bit. You enter this situation with little explanation as to why things are happening, and you have to make choices, of course. This is in the tradition of the old school type of solitaire or choose your own path adventures. Although the adventure feels quite story driven, or is more like a story arc type of adventure, so don't expect it to feel more like on the sandbox side of things, like some of the excellent entries from Flying Buffalo or Tavern Master for Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls. This feels more like a story arc type of adventure. So you're going to make different choices that will take you, perhaps they will give you success, or automatic success, but sometimes you will have to carry out checks, of course. Something that I liked is that there's a significant amount of time or encounters where it really matters when you pay attention to what is being described. So if they describe a particular non-player character or an area or a building and such, and you try to look into things like, oh, I don't think that non-player character is telling the truth, or I think he is telling the truth, or that building seems somewhat easy to get into from this side, or such. It really rewards you when you take a choice and you thought, oh, I knew it, it's logical, I guessed correctly, and or rather than guess, I thought things out correctly. So in that way, the adventure rewards you. And as I was telling you, you really have to take into consideration that many situations are more suited for a rogue type of character. You won't be able to use all of the skills and all of the potential of the Dark Eye role-playing game, in my opinion. Although this adventure does create a pretty excellent mood, and it brings the world, your adventures in Aventuria come alive with all of those details, that it's, even though it's a high fantasy setting, it feels like some quite realistic at times, and suddenly they bring out some element from fantasy, and it feels like a pleasant, jarring situation or feeling that I thought it was like really normal, and suddenly they bring out this fantasy element, and I'm like, wow, now you get surprised like that. And you will proceed throughout the entire adventure, negotiating the different situations and going through different areas, trying to put clues together. There is a bit of detective work in this adventure. It's not all like a hack and slash or just going through a gauntlet of sorts. If you like a bit of detective work, not as much, but but a good amount of it, so that you can try to figure out. There you will find that in this adventure. I actually figured out almost the entirety of the plot line, which I don't know if it is because I'm experienced in that type of detective type of adventures, but perhaps some of you would find it a bit predictable. And so I'm going to tell you what I liked and disliked of this adventure, and this is going to be a bit of a surprise perhaps, but I actually didn't like the adventure. I think that there will be people who will enjoy it, but I personally didn't like it for a number of reasons. First of all, it always feels like you are playing as a wimp, or your character almost feels like a damsel in distress at times. Perhaps you could say like a manzel in distress. It's supposed to be like a male character by default. And that's somewhat annoying, because maybe you wanted to create your own character, and the situations already make you feel too vulnerable at times, and that's I don't think it was a good way to handle things. For example, once again, we have those awesome examples from Flying Buffalo and Tavern Master Games and Outland Arts from the Mutant Epoch, those solo adventures. In those adventures, your characters feel really vulnerable and as well, and that they could die at any moment, but they still feel really heroic. But here it is not so, and I also think it is due to an overused plot device, one of the probably the most hated plot devices that game masters could use in different role-playing games. And I'm not going to tell you which, but I'm sure you can probably guess which one. Imagine that you have created your character and you're having an adventure. What is the worst thing that a game master can do to you to force you into a particular dangerous situation? Well, maybe there are more plot devices, but I'm almost certain that in the top 3 of those devices, you're going to find what happens in this adventure, which is really annoying. I have yet to meet a player who doesn't hate that particular way of forcing you into a situation, and it is so overused in this adventure. The author even makes like a joke about it, like, oh, this has happened so many times, you actually wonder if you're okay with this or that. So, and it's not even funny, it's ridiculous, and it takes away from the immersiveness. As I was telling you, it only makes you feel like you are a really dumb, playing as a really dumb character, because it always happens to you. You would think that after happening perhaps once or twice, you would know better, but it happens all the time. And you always feel like really wimpy. It's so annoying. And another thing that I disliked of the adventure is that the author is constantly telling you what your character thinks and what your character is saying. And there is a reason why silent protagonists in these types of adventures, or perhaps even video games, for example, are so popular, because you get to decide what your character is thinking, what your character is saying. You don't need others to tell you that. You can have some general motivations perhaps, but you're going to be thinking and saying what you will. And again, we have the examples of the Flying at Buffalo Adventures and Tavern Master Games and the Mutant Epoch, where they only describe the situation, and it's up to you what your character is thinking and saying. Because, for example, it's okay if I told you something like, you see this ominous cavern in front of you, it is so dark, but there is like a small light at the end of the cavern. What could it be? But here they're going to tell you, oh, the cavern is so dark and you feel terrified, you only want to pee your pants, you can't wait to get out of there. Oh no, you're thinking this was such a bad idea, and your character says, oh no, this is horrible. So and it takes away from the immersiveness. Maybe you wanted to role play as a very badass assassin, or perhaps a very heroic knight, and here they're already telling you what you are thinking and what you are saying. That's a bit annoying. Another thing is that I think this adventure is too railroady for its own good. Even though this is a story arc adventure and you must follow a certain path, there are many instances where you think that no matter the choice that you take, it's going to take you to point A. No matter what you choose, it's going to take you to point A. It feels somewhat annoying. And again, once you may have like different paths, but they all take you to the same encounter. And once you solve that encounter, again, it feels like no matter what the choice that you're taking, it's going to take you to the same encounter, and that is in the long run of the adventure. And so that's it could have been handled so much better, and that also makes the adventure a bit predictable, especially because here they handle some, let's say, time skips at times. And you kind of get this false sense of security that, oh, well, I'm going to be okay because I know that my character isn't going to end up in a really, really bad situation because of this event that happened, and that gives you a false sense of security. Well, maybe, or rather, a justified sense of security that the adventure is going to go in a particular way. Again, compared with the Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls adventures, when you don't know when the adventure is going to end, it's so exciting because you don't know if that choice that you took could be a really terrible choice, or perhaps such an incredible and smart choice that you could actually win the adventure in a couple of after a couple of encounters with and be rewarded for those intelligent choices. And here you're almost get the sense from the very beginning, and justifiably so, that, oh, this adventure is going to take a long time, and no matter what I choose, I'm going to go through all of those things. It feels kind of like, imagine that you're playing again an adventure with your game master, and suddenly, and you know that you have to go through all of an area or all of a dungeon. This is particularly more how would you say, significant in mega dungeons, and some players don't want to explore all of the dungeon. They want to go through the most important and most rewarding areas. In fact, it is advised at times that you avoid certain encounters or areas if you don't want to suffer a terrible death. Some places are unbeatable. And here in the Vampire of Havena, it kind of feels like you have to go through the entire ordeal. That's also a bit annoying, for example, when you get killed, because I consider cheating when you, for example, you go through these soldier adventures, and you're like, oh, well, if I take this wrong choice, I just have to go to this page and take the other choice. I feel that it's a bit like cheating, because it makes the situation more exciting and tense, that if you take the wrong choice, you have to play the adventure all over again from the beginning, and succeeding and all those different challenges with your checks and such. And so again, I think that at times it feels like the adventure overstays its welcome. So, as you can see, I have really strong criticisms about this adventure, even though there are some positive things, because, for example, I think it does a really good job at times at showing you what Aventuria is all about, and presenting that moody atmosphere, and seeing the interactions with non-player characters, giving you a sense of the types of situations and how magic suddenly enters into your everyday life experience of Aventuria. And another negative thing, in my opinion, is that this adventure falls short at many times. They present you with some brilliant setups, and you say, oh, this area looks so awesome. It feels like there's going to, something really amazing is going to happen there. And you go through the area, and that's it. And you get disappointed. And I don't want to spoil things, but let's say that a certain villain disappointed me quite a bit as well. It just felt so unexciting, and even you take a look at the cover of the adventure, you kind of get the feeling that this adventure is going to be a lot more epic and perhaps even a lot more creepy. But when you actually figure out what is going on in its entirety, I felt so disappointed that the enemy was like that. There are so many ways that I disliked of this adventure. As I was telling you, it's not that the adventure is quite terrible, but in my opinion, it's below being decent, just barely decent, perhaps. So, if you dislike all of the things that I mentioned, this is not the adventure for you. And it's a bit disappointing as well, because I think this adventure is like set up to have a sequel, because there is a bit like a cliffhanger at the end. It's not an incomplete adventure, but you have like a small loose end pointing out to the possibility of moving on with this adventure. But I do not feel excited about continuing this. If you like story arcs and if you like your character to be portrayed as a specific stereotype in fantasy, maybe you won't dislike this adventure. But because of all of the things that I mentioned, they take away so much from the agency or sense of control of a player and trying to roleplay this character, and you get all those things that serve as obstacles. I think there are a couple of two criticisms that at the moment I am forgetting about how this adventure was handled. Yeah, that's there are some moments in this adventure where the adventure could end with you perhaps dying or even succeeding, but I don't feel like after all of the things that you live through the adventure, those end scenarios don't feel really appropriate. Even, for example, I think maybe that was an error, but one time I actually died in this adventure, and it said like the end, and the end was clickable. That is, you had a hyperlink, and then when I clicked the end, the epilogue made, the ending made no sense at all with what happened. So I don't know why they made that the end clickable. I think it was a mistake. And even when I actually won the adventure, I think I got the best ending possible. I played it a few times and was telling you that's I think that's the best way to end the adventure. The end felt too forced, and it almost made no sense with my choices. So I actually wouldn't recommend getting the Vampire of Havena unless, for example, maybe you want a lot of information of Havena, a harbor city of many traditions, and you can't wait for the Aventuria Gazetteer. I actually wouldn't recommend this one. And especially because of the price. Maybe the artwork was quite expensive, but this adventure is not exactly cheap for what it offers. I would prefer to get like 2 or 3 Flying Buffalo adventures or from Tavern Master Games. So yeah, sadly I didn't like this adventure. Well, either way, I hope you found this review entertaining. Thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.